The Texas night outside my dorm room felt heavy, almost sticky, as if the summer heat refused to let go even after midnight. The ceiling fan turned in slow, lazy circles above my head, doing little more than stirring the warm air. It was 2:45 a.m., and the only light in the room came from the desk lamp, its yellow glow pooling over my open neurology textbook, highlighting the pages crammed with underlined terms and scribbled notes. My eyes burned from hours of reading, and the words in front of me started to blur together, the long, complicated phrases twisting into something unrecognizable. Hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, multifocal atherosclerosis, they no longer felt like medical terms, but like wild creatures refusing to be tamed. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes, the exhaustion making my temples throb. The cicadas outside hummed in a steady rhythm, their song merging with the faint scent of jasmine drifting through the open window. For a moment, I thought about just letting my head fall onto the desk and giving in to the weight pulling me down. But then, without warning, an image surfaced in my mind, my father's old doctor's bag. It was made of worn brown leather, soft in some places, cracked in others, with a brass clasp dulled by time. I could still hear my father's voice the day he first showed it to me, the sunlight streaming through the blinds of his small clinic in our hometown. "This bag has been with our family for almost 100 years, Liv," he'd said, his tone warm, almost reverent. "Your great-grandfather carried it through the war. Your grandfather took it into rural towns where hospitals didn't exist. And now it's my turn. One day maybe it will be yours." I had traced the initials stamped into the leather, BC for Benjamin Carter, and asked him if it was heavy. He smiled, that tired, gentle smile of his. "It's not the bag that's heavy, sweetheart. It's the responsibility it carries. These hands," he took my small ones in his, strong and warm, "they're meant to heal. That's both a gift and a burden. And it's one you'll have to carry with care." The memory faded, leaving behind the same bittersweet ache it always did. My father's presence was never constant, but when he was there, the world felt brighter. He'd sweep into the house with expensive gifts I didn't know we couldn't afford, telling stories of the patients he'd saved, of long nights in Houston's busiest hospitals, of the people who thanked him with tears in their eyes. And my mother, for those brief days, she seemed lighter too, her shoulders straighter, her laugh more frequent, as if the years of fatigue had been lifted, if only temporarily. It was the same laugh she must have had when she first fell in love with him, back when she was a young nurse, and he was the charismatic surgeon everyone admired. I took a slow breath and glanced at the clock again. 2:51 a.m. The exam loomed closer with every passing minute, but the thought of my father's words seemed to anchor me in place. I reached for my pen, the plastic cool against my fingers, and forced my eyes back to the textbook. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was I. It happened in the spring, on one of those rare Houston days when the air felt almost cool and the sky stretched in a perfect, unbroken blue. I was still in high school, sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of homework in front of me, when the phone rang. My mother answered, her voice light at first, then quieter, and then completely still. I didn't know what the words were at first. I just knew the way her hand clutched the counter, how her knuckles turned white. When she hung up, she didn't look at me right away. "It's your father," she finally said. He collapsed. A heart attack. He had been just 6 blocks from the hospital where he'd saved countless lives over the years. But this time, no one had been there fast enough. The cruelest irony, the man who had brought strangers back from the brink didn't get the same chance. The funeral was held in a stately old church in the city. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the pews. I expected to see colleagues, patients, maybe distant relatives. What I didn't expect was the tall, elegant woman standing near the front, dressed in black, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a young man. Beside him stood a girl my age, her gaze sharp yet curious. "This is Matthew," my mother murmured when she caught me staring. "And Hannah," She hesitated, her voice flattening. Your brother and sister. The words felt foreign, awkward in my ears, like they didn't belong to me. My brother and sister, from a life I knew nothing about. After the service, I couldn't stop looking at them. The way Matthew carried himself with a quiet confidence. The way Hannah's eyes flicked over me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I didn't know whether I hated them, envied them, or just wanted to vanish before they spoke to me. Back home, I finally asked my mother the question burning in my chest. Why didn't you tell me? She met my eyes with the kind of weariness that comes from years of holding things in. What would it have changed, Liv? You loved him. He loved you. The rest, those were adult problems. But it did change something. Everything, really. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the shifts in our world. Subtle at first, then undeniable. Mom started picking up extra shifts at the small clinic where she worked. Grocery lists got shorter. New clothes were quietly replaced by repairs and alterations. One night, as she patched a worn hem on my skirt for the third time, I finally asked, "We're having money problems, aren't we?" She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not problems, just adjustments. Your father helped us before. We'll just have to learn to manage without it. It was then I realized those extravagant gifts he used to bring weren't just gestures of love. They had been holding up our lives in ways I hadn't seen. And now that safety net was gone. That was the night I decided I couldn't just be a passenger in my own life anymore. I was 16 when I made my first truly adult decision. There was no dramatic speech, no teary confrontation. Just a quiet shift in the way I moved through the world. I stopped taking piano lessons. I told my art instructor I wouldn't be coming back. I turned down every invitation from friends to grab burgers after school or catch a Friday night movie. At first, they laughed it off. "What? Are you grounded or something?" My best friend at the time, Melissa, asked when I skipped yet another outing. I just shook my head and said, "I've got other things to do." But the truth sat heavier than I let on. By then, I had $20 to last me the week, and I had to stretch for gas, snacks, and anything else that came up. One by one, the invitations stopped. My phone buzzed less. By the end of junior year, it was mostly just me, my textbooks, and my mother coming home from the clinic looking like she was holding herself together by sheer will. But in the middle of all that, one thing stayed clear. I was going to medical school. Not just any school. The University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. It was the same place my father used to talk about, his voice tinged with pride and nostalgia. UTMB makes real doctors, he'd say. The kind who can hold their own in any ER in the country. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating leftover chili, I told my mother I planned to apply there. She set her spoon down and looked at me like I'd just announced I was climbing Everest without oxygen. "You know how competitive it is, Liv? 15 applicants for every spot, and that's just for the in-state program." "I know," I said, keeping my tone even. "That's why I'm going to work twice as hard." Her eyes softened, but there was something else there too, something like fear. It's not about how hard you work. It's the system. People like us, we either work twice as hard for half as much, or we accept what we're given. "Then I'll take the first option," I said, "and I won't quit." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that made every sound in the house suddenly louder. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint creak of the chair as she leaned back. I don't think she understood then, not fully, that this wasn't just a phase or a burst of teenage stubbornness. This was the only path I saw forward. That night, I spread my books out across the living room floor, cross-legged on the carpet. I made a schedule that would carry me all the way through senior year and into my first college entrance exams. Looking back, I don't know if it was determination or desperation, maybe a little of both. But either way, I had set my course. And nothing, not money, not exhaustion, not the weight of my father's shadow, was going to knock me off it. The envelope arrived 2 days before my high school graduation. It was plain white, the kind you'd buy in a pack of 50, but my name was written in careful, deliberate handwriting that I didn't recognize. The return address read, Matthew Carter Austin, Texas. I stood in the kitchen, the afternoon light slanting across the counter, turning the envelope over in my hands. For a long time, I didn't open it. We'd barely spoken at the funeral. He'd been polite, distant, like a stranger you meet in passing, but his eyes had carried something unreadable. When I finally tore the flap open, two things slid out, a folded letter and a small USB drive. Liv, the letter began, I know this might seem sudden after years of silence. Our connection is complicated. We share blood, but not a life. Dad left behind a trail of unfinished conversations, and I think some of them were meant for you. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning out his study here in Austin and found a folder with your name on it. Inside were medical case notes, journal entries, and articles he'd clipped over the years. I scanned them all for you. They're on the drive. There's also a letter of recommendation addressed to someone named Dr. Alan Brooks at the University of Texas Medical Branch. I think you should see it for yourself. If you ever want to talk, my number is on the back of this page. I set the letter aside and plugged the drive into my laptop. It was like stepping into an archive built just for me. Pages of anatomy sketches, handwritten notes in my father's sharp, slanted script, diagrams for medical journals, even practice exam questions. I found myself smiling despite the lump forming in my throat. And then I opened the letter addressed to Dr. Brooks. My father's words hit me like a pulse through the chest. Trust me on this one, Alan. The girl's a real Carter. She's got the same blood that carried 3 generations of us through battlefields, epidemics, and operating rooms. She's determined, sharp, and she will make you proud if you give her the chance. I read those lines again and again until the letters blurred. For 3 years, I'd carried the weight of not knowing whether he'd truly believed in me, or if all my ambition was just my way of filling the space he'd left behind. But here it was in his own hand, proof that he'd seen me, even if he hadn't always been there. That night, I sat at my desk long after the sun had gone down. The USB drive still plugged in, its little light blinking like it was keeping watch. I traced my fingers over the paper, over my father's name at the bottom of the page, and felt something I hadn't in a long time, like maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I thought. 3 days after graduation, I boarded a Greyhound bound for Galveston with a second-hand duffel bag, my father's letter carefully folded in my wallet, and just over $200 to my name. The bus ride took a little over an hour, but the air changed the moment we rolled into the island, thicker, salter, tinged with the faint smell of diesel from the fishing boats down at the pier. I had never been to Galveston before. It wasn't the sprawling, steel-and-glass skyline of Houston. Here, the streets felt slower, more weathered, the buildings bleached by sun and sea air. I stepped off the bus into the kind of heat that seemed to press against your skin, like a physical weight, and told myself I could handle anything. My first stop was the University of Texas Medical Branch. The main building loomed ahead, all brick and white columns, a blend of history and authority. I tightened my grip on my bag and went in search of Dr. Alan Brooks. It didn't take long to find someone who looked like he belonged there, a tall man in a pressed shirt, silver hair neatly combed back, holding a stack of papers under one arm. I approached him, heart pounding. "Excuse me," I began. "Do you happen to know Dr. Alan Brooks?" He turned, his brow furrowing slightly. "I'm Dr. Brooks. How can I help you?" Relief and nerves collided in my chest. "My name is Olivia Carter. My father was Benjamin Carter. He left me a letter of recommendation for you." The name seemed to land somewhere in his memory, but his expression stayed guarded. Benjamin Carter. Yes, I remember him. A good surgeon. He glanced toward the hallway. "Why don't we talk in my office?" The walk there felt longer than it was. I sat across from his desk while he read the letter, his eyes scanning quickly, then more slowly. When he looked up, there was no pity in his face, only professionalism. You have decent grades, he said. Good, but you need to understand, UTMB takes the best of the best. And getting in is only half the battle. The rest, well, that's on you. I'm ready to work for it, I said, leaning forward without realizing it. He nodded once, as if weighing my words. I'm not in the business of handing out favors. Benjamin was a friend, but medicine is serious work. You'll have to prove yourself. If you do, then maybe we'll talk again. When I left his office, the sun was beginning to sink, turning the Gulf waters a deep orange. I should have felt discouraged, but I didn't. For the first time in months, someone had spoken to me without softening their words, without pretending the path ahead would be anything but brutal. And that somehow felt like respect. By the time exam day came, I'd been living out of a cheap room I'd rented week to week near the seawall, the kind where the air conditioner rattled louder than it cooled. Every spare moment had gone into studying. Flashcards spread across the bed, diagrams taped to the wall, my father's notes open beside me like a lifeline. I told myself over and over, if I just worked hard enough, I could make it. The written test felt like walking a tightrope over open water. Questions came in rapid fire, but the hours of drilling and memorization paid off. Answers rose to the surface of my mind before doubt could drag them under. By the time I handed in my paper, I was exhausted but steady. I'd done everything I could. The next morning, I joined the crowd huddled around the bulletin board outside the admissions office. Names were posted in neat, alphabetical order, the kind of list you could scan in seconds, unless yours wasn't there. I looked once, twice. My eyes kept searching, refusing to believe it. Finally, I found a staff member and asked if there had been a mistake. She shook her head gently. You missed the cutoff by 1 point. 1 point. 1. It was such a small number that it didn't even seem real. But the space between me and that passing score might as well have been the Gulf of Mexico. I wandered to a payphone on the corner, the Texas sun beating down on me until sweat trickled down my back. My cell was dead, and I hadn't thought to bring the charger. When my mother picked up, I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't make it, I said. There's a pause, just long enough for me to think the line had gone dead. Then she said, maybe that's for the best, Liv. The words hit harder than I expected. For the best. Her voice was careful, almost too calm. It's just, it would have been expensive, stressful. You could apply to the teaching college back home. Live here. It wouldn't be such a strain. I knew she meant well, but what I heard was relief, that she wouldn't have to worry about sending money, about her daughter living hours away in a city that could swallow her whole. No, I said, sharper than I meant to. I'm staying in Galveston. I'll start at the community college's nursing program and transfer later. I'm still going to be a doctor. When I hung up, I stood there for a long time, staring at the faded phone booth wall, my reflection faint in the scratched glass. The dream hadn't changed, only the route had, and if that meant taking the long way around, then so be it. The dorm room they assigned me at Galveston Community College was on the 3rd floor of an aging brick building that smelled faintly of salt and mildew. The paint on the walls had begun to bubble in spots, and the small window rattled every time the coastal wind pushed against it. My new roommate, Kayla Johnson, was a stocky girl from a farming town out near the Panhandle. She spoke little, kept her hair in a tight braid, and always seemed to have something to chew. Homemade cornbread, dried jerky, sometimes just sunflower seeds. For the first week, we moved around each other in silence. Then one night, while I sat on my bed trying to trick my stomach into ignoring its own emptiness with nothing but hot water and a spoonful of sugar, she slid a plate across the desk toward me without looking up from her notes. It held a thick slice of cornbread and a jar of peach preserves. Eat, she said simply. It's painful watching you live on tea and crackers. From then on, we had an unspoken trade. She shared the food her mother mailed in massive care packages, and I helped her with her coursework, explaining anatomy charts and checking her quizzes. It wasn't friendship exactly, more like survival in a shared trench. Outside that room, it was different. My classmates were mostly from well-off families, fresh manicures, the latest iPhones, weekend trips to Houston for shopping or concerts. They'd glance at my thrift store backpack, the sweater with repaired elbows, and look right past me. One afternoon, as I walked into the lab, the class rep, a bleach blonde with perfect lashes, called across the room, "Hey, Ragged Olivia, you left your ID in the dean's office. Might want to pick it up before they think you stole it." The way she said it wasn't sharp, wasn't meant to start a fight. It was casual, like she'd just used my job title, and somehow that made it sting worse. By winter, the island wind had turned damp and cold. My coat was the same one I'd worn in high school, its lining thinned from years of wear, and my shoes had developed a slit along the sole that let in water when I walked across the puddled streets. Every morning, the chill settled deep in my bones before I even made it to the first lecture. Then came the notice for a holiday fundraiser, $500 per student to buy gifts for the faculty. For most of them, it was nothing a week's allowance. For me, it was the last straw. That night, I pulled the tin box from under my bed, the one that held my just-in-case fund. Inside was $1,000 scraped together over months, along with the only photo I had of my father holding me as a little girl. I held the picture for a long time, tracing the lines of his smile. My throat tightened as I whispered, "I can't keep doing this." I was ready to call my mother the next morning, ask for enough bus fare to come home, and let this whole dream go. But that knock on the door changed everything. When I opened the door that night, I expected a dorm advisor or maybe Kayla with another jar of preserves. Instead, a slim girl with cropped dark hair and sharp brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses stood there, a rolling suitcase by her side. "Hey," she said brightly. "I'm Jasmine Lopez. Just transferred from the nursing program up in San Antonio. They told me I'm your new roommate. Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside, still caught off guard. She scanned the room in one sweeping glance and smiled. "Cozy. Could use a little work, but I've seen worse." Then she glanced at my desk. "Is there anywhere around here to grab a bite? I'm starving." "There's a communal kitchen down the hall," I said, "but I've got some cornbread if you want." She grinned. "Even better. I'll go grab something from the store tomorrow and we'll make it a real meal." It was the first time in months I'd sat across from someone new and actually talked. We shared cornbread and tea, swapping bits of our lives in half-joking tones. Her childhood in Laredo, my father's old doctor's bag, the way Galveston air seemed to stick to your skin no matter how many showers you took. 2 weeks later, Jasmine convinced me to join her for morning runs. "It's not about speed," she said. "It's about clearing your head before the day chews you up." That morning, the sky over the Gulf was streaked in pale pink and gray. We jogged along the quiet canal, the water dark and still, broken only by the ripple of a passing pelican. Then Jasmine slowed, squinting ahead. "What's that?" "A bird stuck in the reeds." I followed her gaze and froze. It wasn't a bird. It was a man. He lay half in the water, half on the muddy bank, his clothes soaked through, his face turned toward the reeds. "Probably just drunk," Jasmine muttered. "We should call the cops." "What if it's not that?" I said, already moving. "What if he's in trouble?" The slope was slick from last night's rain. My sneakers slid, and I nearly lost my balance before hitting the bank hard enough to send cold mud splattering up my legs. But when I reached him and touched his shoulder, he stirred, weakly, his eyes glassy, his mouth opening around sounds that didn't form words. And then it clicked. The uneven facial muscles, the slurred, broken syllables, the vacant, struggling focus. "Jasmine." I called up. "Call 911 right now. Tell them it's a stroke. We've got minutes." She hesitated just long enough for me to shout again, then pulled out her phone. I knelt beside him, forcing my voice into something steady. "Sir, can you squeeze my hand?" His left hand twitched weakly against mine. The right stayed limp. "Okay, you're going to be all right. Help is coming." You're not alone. The wind off the water bit through my wet clothes, but I didn't move. I just stayed there, holding on, counting my own breaths as sirens began to wail somewhere far off and growing closer. The paramedics arrived in a rush of bright lights and purposeful movements, their boots splashing through the mud as they lowered the stretcher down the slope. One of them, a tall man with weathered hands, knelt to check the patient's vitals. "Good call," he said to me after a quick exam. "If you hadn't spotted this when you did, the outcome could have been very different." They lifted him gently, securing straps and 4 lines before carrying him up to the waiting ambulance. Jasmine reappeared at my side, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You're shaking," she said quietly. "I'm fine, Elite." But the truth was the adrenaline had my whole body humming, every nerve on edge. 10 minutes later, one of the medics waved us toward a dark SUV idling near the curb. "Mr. Davidson would like to speak with you when you have a moment," he said. Inside the vehicle, the air was cool and smelled faintly of leather. The man from the canal, now propped up against pillows, an oxygen line under his nose, looked at me with one steady eye. The other side of his face still bore the slackness of the stroke, but there was warmth in his gaze. "Thank you," he said slowly, each word a careful effort. "You saved my life." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," he murmured. Then, after a pause, "My name is Charles Davidson. I own a construction firm in Houston. Jasmine tells me you're studying nursing, but aiming for medical school." I glanced at Jasmine. She gave a small shrug, as if to say she hadn't meant to spill my whole story. Mr. Davidson's expression hardened with resolve. "Let me pay for it. Tuition, books, housing, all of it. You've already proven you have what it takes." The words seemed to hang in the air, too heavy to process all at once. I can't accept that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's too much." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "It's not charity. It's an investment in someone who knows what it means to act when it matters. Please, Olivia, let me do this." I thought of my father's letter, of my mother working herself thin, of every closed door I'd tried to push through on my own. And for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to fight every battle alone. That night, I called my mother from the dorm's common room. I told her everything, my words tumbling over each other in a rush. When I finally stopped, there was a long silence on the line. "Mom." Her voice trembled when it came. "It's a miracle, Liv, and you've earned it. I'm proud of you." The next morning, there was a letter waiting in my campus mailbox. The return address read, Matthew Carter. I heard about what happened. It began. "Dad would be proud of you. I know we've never been close, but maybe it's time we tried. You're a Carter in every sense that matters." That evening, I walked down to the canal. The water was calm, reflecting the deep orange of the Texas sunset. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the strange paths that had brought me here, the losses, the betrayals, the near misses, and how each one had shaped the person I was becoming. My father's dream had started me on this road, but from now on it was mine, step by step, day by day, with hands made to heal,